How's it
What
going?
do we got going on today?
Well, first of all, ARK Invests. It's very hard to say. Kathy Wood, the CEO of ARK Invest, said that the U.S. is already in an economic downturn. There is no question about it. I was going to say something else. Okay. She said, we think we are in a recession. We think a big problem out there is inventories, the increase of which I've never seen this large in my career, and I've been around for 45 years. Meanwhile, the New York Federal Reserve President John Williams said that he expects the U.S. economy to avoid a recession, even as he sees the need for significantly higher interest to control inflation.
This is how markets get made, is that some people think we're in a recession and going deeper into one. Other people say that we're not in a recession. They don't think that we're going to go into one.
Okay, but one is delusional, clearly, because how can both be true?
Well, are they delusional, or are they simply looking at different data points? Or are they looking at the same data points and getting different conclusions? But that's where the market gets made, is that take a stock as an example. You can take 10 investors, they all can look at one stock, and they can look at what the price of the stock is, they can look at all the financials, they can look at all of the public reporting of that company, et cetera. And some of them will come out and say, this is a buy, it's undervalued, it's gonna be amazing. And other people look at it and be like, this is the crappiest company in the world, I wouldn't touch it with a stick.
Right.
And when you look at that, they're all synthesizing the data differently. And so what a lot of is happening here is that you get people inside of the economist organizations, you get the Federal Reserve presidents, you get people who go on mainstream media saying, hey, recession's not coming. You also get folks who are investing or in some of these positions saying that a recession is here. And what we do know, if we just go kind of facts, is that in Q1, the GDP data in the United States, we contracted. On an annualized basis, it was minus 1.4%. And so for there to be a recession, the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, which means that if in Q2 we get negative GDP growth, then we are technically in a recession. If you go back to March of 2020, what happened was we got negative GDP growth in Q1, and we got negative GDP growth in Q2. And so it was categorized as a quote unquote recession, but it was like the shortest recession ever because everything came flying back. And so the question now is going to really just hinge on, is GDP growth in Q2 positive or negative? If it's negative, by definition, we're in a recession. If it's positive, then by definition, we're not in a recession. And so if you put aside for a second the quote unquote definition of a recession and you say, what are people ultimately getting at? Really what I think people are trying to get at is just, are we headed towards better times or are we actually headed towards worse times? And it's hard to see a world where we are going to be headed towards better times until the Federal Reserve and many of the kind of tighter financial conditions that are being put on the market pivot and head back towards loose monetary policy and start to encourage much more investment and consumption. Right now, they are incentivizing you not to do that, and therefore it is likely that we are headed towards worse and worse times. The question is, how long will that last? How severe will it get? But that's the direction that we're headed. Whether we actually get a true definition of a recession or not, I think is less of importance. And it's more about what is the everyday person actually feeling on the ground.
Right. And I think Williams made an important point that there's a difference between a recession and a slowdown.
Correct.
And right now we don't know if we're in a slowdown like we were in 2020, 2021, whatever.
Nobody knows what the future holds.
Yeah.
But what we do know is, look, we're at the end of June. So there's a lot of data points that people can look at and say, okay, April and May, what does that look like? What do we get from the first 2 weeks of June so far? You basically have maybe a week or two of data that you don't yet have access to. But other than that, we have most of the data. And so that's why I said, people are looking at the same data points. Some people think we're in a recession, other people think we're not. How do you get two different conclusions from the same data set? Well, that's because humans are really bad at synthesizing information. But a key piece is we're going to find out in the next 4 to 5 weeks, depending on when the GDP data comes out. We're going to find out exactly, are we in a recession or not? Because it's either GDP grew or shrank in Q2, and that'll be the definitive answer.
Okay. Let's talk about homes and interest rates.
Let's talk.
Online real estate brokerage Redfin found that basically potential homebuyers are being able to afford less on the same budget in the last year. And they said that they calculated that as interest rates rise, a good chunk of homebuyers have lost up to $165,000 in purchasing power on new homes in the last year. What does that tell you?
I mean, this is an all-time headline for them to come out with.
Why? Because up to could be $5 or $105?
Yes, but that's probably less important compared to the average homeowner being able to buy $165,000 less of the home has some to do with interest rates. If there's more and more kind of expensive capital that's available, and you are disincentivized from borrowing that capital to go and buy a home, then yes, you don't have as much capital available to you to go purchase. Okay. But also home prices have absolutely ripped in America. And the average new home in America now costs more than $500,000. And I think the average home in America is like over $400,000 or something. So when you look at these numbers, it's like, okay, I don't have to be a mathematician, but if the average real estate is going up 20% over the last year, then of course people have less ability to buy it, especially when wages don't keep up. And so there's many different factors that go into this, but it is pretty clear that a year ago, somebody would be able to buy more of a home or get more for their money than they can today. I just don't think you can only say it's because of interest rates. Interest rates is a big piece of it, but there's also things around inflation. There's things about wage growth. There's many factors that go into it that ultimately get you to the conclusion.
Do you want to guess the 5 cities that have experienced the biggest drops in affordability?
Miami.
No.
New York.
No.
LA.
No.
Austin.
Yes.
Chicago.
No.
I went 1 for 5. All right, what are the 5 cities?
Phoenix, Raleigh, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and Austin. So these are places
Phoenix, I should have known.
that were already kind of affordable to live in, but there was such a boom in the last year of people buying homes there that the affordability.
I don't know how they're
plummeted.
calculating that. If you were to look at cities where prices exploded, I'm actually surprised that Miami wouldn't be in there. Phoenix definitely, Austin as well. Those are winners of kind of the COVID kind of shuffle where people were moving to new cities. Salt Lake City also, there are a lot of tech companies and workers who moved there. But the affordability thing, my guess is that they're trying to measure not only home price increases, but also things like wage growth and elsewhere. Because affordability is if home prices go up 20%, but everyone's making 50% more money, then actually it became more affordable. Yeah. Right. Instead, what happens here is you have to look at both sides of the equation.
I need to work on my tan.
Raleigh, North Carolina, by the way, becoming less affordable.
Oh, is that interesting?
Yeah, it is
I like Raleigh.
Yeah.
You're okay on Raleigh? Do you like Raleigh?
I love Raleigh.
Oh.
Said
with some hesitation.
No,
Okay.
I genuinely do. It's one of the only places in the world, in my opinion. I'm super biased. For those that don't know, I grew up in the area. It's one of the only places in the world where I think that built into kind of the city and the expectations and the social scene and all of that is there's a really healthy work-life balance. So if that's what you're seeking, it's a great place. And also they've, I'm going to call it modernized or kind of started to redevelop a lot of the downtown area. They have things like Research Triangle Park.
There's a lot of universities. There's young people. There's research. There's stocks.
UNC, Duke, NC State, or whatever. Duke's best, but listen, I'm a sports fan. All right, what's next?
I was pleasantly surprised by Raleigh. All right, so buy now, pay later. Unfortunately, we do not have our 11-year-old Jacob correspondent here to tell us that this is basically a loan. You do not buy anything.
That's still one of my favorite things.
He's so good. He's the best.
He said, so it's like a loan.
Yeah, it's literally a loan.
All right.
But these companies that, like Klarna and Affirm, they kind of are faltering now because they were very big before. They're facing increased competition with Apple trying to do something that we've talked about previously, but also companies like Mondu, Hakodo, and Billy are raising a ton of money, and now they're the darlings of buy now, pay later. But the difference is, and I think this is brilliant, they're not going after consumers. They're going after businesses. So it's B2B, not B2C. And I think it makes sense that way.
There's a lot to unpack here. We don't have time to go through it all, but what I would say is one clear critique of the buy now, pay laters, or a caution, is most of them have not lived through a true economic recession. And so they've been started, post the global financial crisis. What does this look like if all of a sudden these products are available? What does it look like in terms of people repaying? How does that change the risk profile? How do rates change? There's a bunch of questions in there. What is surprising to me is that people are claiming that they're faltering. I would like to know why they think that they're faltering. And it doesn't surprise me, though, that somebody said, hey, if this works for retail, why don't we go business to business? It gets back to this whole idea of trying to get better and better credit as like the counterparty. So would you rather underwrite the credit of an individual, or would you rather underwrite the credit of a business? Most people would say the business, it's got a longer track record. It usually has more capital. It's got more sophisticated financial kind of management, all that stuff. Do you want to hear something pretty crazy real quick?
Sure.
This is a little alpha for everyone. I'm not going to tell you all of the details because I'm currently trying to figure something out, and I'll let you know once I figure it out.
As long as it's not beta, I want to hear alpha.
There's a gentleman, Daniel Ludwig.
Just ignore that.
Don't say anything about him, but there's a gentleman, Daniel Ludwig, who many of you may not have ever heard of before. He at one point was the richest man in the world. And part of how he became one of the richest men in the world is that he figured out a very unique lending structure. So what he did was he wanted to go and purchase an oil tanker, but he didn't have the money to buy the oil tanker. So instead, he went to a customer and he said, hey, will you sign a contract with me to move your oil around the world? And they said, yeah, of course we will. And he said, amazing. And so they signed the contract. He then went to the bank and he said, hey, rather than underwrite me as the individual, why don't you just underwrite this contract? And it's the credit of the company that is going to be paying me that ultimately you're dependent on. So the bank said, wow, we've never done that before, but that's interesting. We'd much rather underwrite that big oil company than underwrite you as an individual. So they went ahead, they gave him the loan. He went and bought the oil tanker and he started to service it. But a key piece to it was that the oil company did not pay him the contractual payments as the oil tanker company. Instead, the oil company paid the bank directly. So at the end of all of this, the bank's counterparty to the loan was actually the oil company, which had great credit and a big balance sheet. Daniel Ludwig was the person who figured out how to do this. And once that they actually paid off the loan, took years, but once they did that, Daniel Ludwig would end up actually owning the oil tanker free and clear, but he actually wasn't the counterparty to the loan. And so eventually banks got even smarter and they said, well, why don't we get both of you to be the counterparty? And so they would underwrite the oil company would make the payments directly to the bank, but also Daniel Ludwig, he would have to personally guarantee the loan as well for the oil tankers. And he went and he built this vast fleet of oil tankers around the world simply by figuring out, I don't have great credit as an individual when he was starting out. And so he was able to get the banks to take the credit of his customers rather than him. And that led to a huge boom. And now this is like a pretty popular thing that people will do when they're trying to finance certain types of companies. So that's what ultimately the buy now, pay later, that's what made me think about it. You can underwrite the individuals, but you'd much rather have the credit counterparty be a large company where you can actually underwrite it in a much more kind of efficient and effective way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's alpha right there. Ain't nobody ever heard that story.
This is what he spent the weekend doing.
Literally, this is what I do on the weekends. I go and I learn stuff like this. All right, what's next?
All right. Wait, what's next?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
EY.
So Ernst & Young, the consulting company.
Heard of them.
Or the accounting firm, whatever. They consult too, right?
They do it all.
They have been slapped with a record $100 million fine from the U.S. government after regulators discovered that the company knew some of its auditors were cheating on exams for several years and did nothing to stop it.
Ooh,
yeah.
That's not good.
On CPA ethics exams, of all things.
What was the cheating?
The cheating.
Was it like they were sharing answers, taking the test together? Was it?
That's a very good question.
I feel like that should be in the article.
Well,
I mean, $100 million fine is, I would think, a large fine.
It doesn't say.
Interesting that they don't say what the cheating was, but that would be definitely a piece that I would want to know. And
it's very like mushy. It says this action involves breaches of trust by gatekeepers within the gatekeeper entrusted to audit many of our nation's public companies. Yeah, who audits the auditor? Interesting question.
Don't trust, verify. That's a great point. I would like to learn more. I'm going to go do some research this afternoon. I'll try to find what
Sorry, guys,
what they
I don't
did.
have the answer for you, but I will look it up.
But that is that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And Lily is saying the ridiculous part is that the ethics exam is an open book test.
Wait.
How do you cheat on open book test?
All right, so it says that
That's a great question.
they were using answer keys and sharing them with their colleagues.
See, I don't know anything
No,
about. I don't know anything about how
cheating.
this works. My question would be: is this something that happens at every single one of these, and eventually the overseers or the regulators were like, "All right, enough," and they went after one to set an example, or is this like a pervasive kind of bad actions inside of one of these organizations? I don't know anything about it, but
I don't know, but I
answer
honestly,
keys. If it's an open book test, aren't the answers in the book?
they should be, but they were using answer keys, like the actual answers to the exam.
Like 1A, 2B,
Yeah.
3C. Oh, got it. Yeah,
Right.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on.
It's cheating.
Come on. All right. What's next?
I wonder how they caught him. Okay.
They probably found the answer keys. And they were like, what's that? And somebody was like, ugh.
All right, let's talk about moon dust,
moon dust?
and cockroaches. So NASA,
Find this stuff.
NASA has asked Boston-based our auction to halt the sale of moon dust collected during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission that had subsequently been fed to cockroaches during an experiment to determine if the lunar rock contained any sort of pathogen that posed a threat to terrestrial life.
Rewind this again. What are they doing?
So they fed cockroaches some moon dust to see if they would get sick, whether the moon dust contained, like toxins.
And what happened?
Unclear. But NASA wants its moon dust back.
Who has it?
Because they said it still belongs to the federal government.
But
This
who has
auction
it?
house.
An auction house has moon dust.
It says the material from the experiment, including a vial with about 40 milligrams of moon dust and 3 cockroach carcasses, was expected to sell for at least $400,000, but has been pulled from the auction block because the government wants its cockroaches and moon
Do we
dust
know
back.
how they got the moon dust?
Probably from the moon during the expedition.
No, I know, but how did the auction house get it? Did like an employee take it?
That's a very good question. You have a lot of very good questions.
I mean,
These
these are just
articles
simple
don't.
questions.
Okay, well, hold on a second.
If you write an article
Okay,
and you
okay.
say, hey, the auction house has moon dust and cockroach carcasses, and you don't include how the auction house got it, and then you go on to say that the federal government wants it back.
No, it says that there was no. So they brought it to the University of Minnesota to study them, but then they were never returned to NASA,
So,
and it stayed there.
so then an auction house went to the University of Minnesota, or did somebody take it?
Stop asking questions.
I mean, listen, I'm just trying to ask simple questions like how does the dust from the moon end up at the auction house?
Next time I will read the article more carefully.
Maybe they don't have the information there. We don't know. Nobody knows.
All right.
All right, ladies and
Goodbye,
gentlemen.
friends.